Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to join the 10th South-South Forum on Sustainability. Apart from Zoom webinar with simultaneous interpreting in Putonghua, English, and Spanish, we are also live streaming in Putonghua for a Chinese audience. For friends on Zoom, please click the group icon and select your preferred language. I thank today's interpreters, Julieta Mendez and Mercedes Picot, for interpreting in English, Spanish, and Huang Xiaomei and Pei Haitong for interpreting in English and Putonghua. May I first introduce the co-moderators for today's session. My name is Sister Jadi Margaret. I am Associate Professor at the Institute for Rural Revitalization Strategy at Southwest University, China. I am also a founding member of Global University for Sustainability. I have been involved in the rural reconstruction movement in China since 2000 years. We started the first South-South Forum on Sustainability in 2011, stopped for 3 years in 2013 to 15 due to budget constraints, but have managed to organize a forum every year since 2016 with a minimal budget. The themes we have covered include Asia in the 21st century, challenges for peoples and movements, transformative visions and practices, ecology, livelihood, and community regeneration, climate change, global crisis and community regeneration, the politics of hope, people's resilience and resistance in catastrophic times, the collapse of modern civilization and the future of humanity. In the past 9 forums, every session was video recorded and uploaded for free access on our websites. For this 10th South-South Forum on Sustainability, the central theme is Thinking New Horizons, to go beyond habitual frames of thought and action in order to foster new approaches and form a strong alliance of hope of the South. We need new horizons of thinking. We are going to honor several critical thoughts striving in this direction, including ecofeminism, indigenous thought from Latin America, thinking regenerated from struggles in Africa and Asia, wisdoms from practice in rural regeneration and solidarity economy, and revival from cultural heritage of different modes of relating to one another and to nature, which are not capitalist modes, destructive of the earth, and of human relations of hope and reciprocity. We would like to thank the 12 co-organizers with Arena, Green Grant, Ecotech Centers, and the institutes from Peking University, Tsinghua University, Southwest University, and Fujian Agriculture and Forestry University for their support all these years. We have been joined as co-organizer by Federal University of Espírito Santo from Brazil, University of Good Living, and Multiplica Mexica Exchange Community from Mexico, Society for International Development from Italy, and Daraja Press from Canada. Their intellectual input is most invaluable. Now we have the section on Buen Vivir, philosophy and practice. Let me introduce another co-moderator, Claudia Alvarez. She has master's degree in social economy, postgraduate degree in constructivism and education. Now she is PhD candidate in geography, Universidad Nacional de La Plata in Argentina, and she is teacher researcher in the colonial epistemologies. Currently, she is engaged in the Universidad de Buen Vivir campaign for a global curriculum of the social solidarity economy, and particularly for postgrad specialization university teaching experience in other economy. Now I pass the floor to Claudia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you very much to the university and to University of Sustainability for this hug that we are, this embrace that we are being able to give each other, for this tissue, social tissue that we are collectively constructing, that you have started with our comrade Claudia Jadira many years ago. So at this moment, for all of us, it is a great honor to be participating with you, with this group of people, of panelists. We are going to be with Jose Manuyama, with Sajito Comas, also with Laura Collins, and with our comrade Virgelina Chara right now from the University of Good Living. Virgelina Chara is to us a light in this good living path. Virgelina is a defender of human rights. She is Colombian. She was nominated to the Nobel Prize, to the Peace Nobel Prize in 2005. She is chair of the Association for Comprehensive Development of Women, Youth, Childhood, and Work. And particularly, she also chairs an alternative PhD in popular, transformative, and solidary economy. So to all of us, it is an honor to have Virgelina with us today. And from she's in one of the live classrooms, because she's in a fair right now. So Virgelina, you have the floor to talk to us and to continue weaving with a lot of love this path that good living is. Good morning. Good morning from Colombia, and good evening to China. Good afternoon to Europe if we have comrades that are joining from Europe. And also good morning to all Latin America and Argentina as well, because of course, all over the world, we have different time zones because of solar and lunar changes. So at some places it is day and others it is nighttime. Thank you very much for being here, for giving me the possibility of being here and getting to know others who are interested in this work that we are developing, in the work that we are doing in order to move forward and develop from an autonomous and self-sustainable perspective. Is there simultaneous translation? Yes. I think that you can continue. We can hear you perfectly. There is simultaneous translation. Okay. In our work, and how Claudia introduced me, we have several processes in the work that we do. First of all, the defense of human rights. We talk about restoration of rights of each one of the Colombian citizens, because there is violence in Latin America that began with European invasion, and that has not stopped. That continues. So we are struggling for the recovery of our land and also for the right to life. And in the same way that we have these problems in Latin America, the problems exist all over the world, because the world at large is resisting in a single voice, in a single cry, demanding the restoration of their rights, and also saying that we deserve the respect of life. So beyond talking about this, we also have a process linked to memory. Memory at the national and international level. This is our political action, as an affirmative action, because Constitution of Colombia doesn't enable us to carry out, enables us to carry out these actions, demanding rights through symbolic actions. They are small, very small actions, because one of the because out of small processes and actions, big processes develop. So as Virgelina Chara, we have done many actions related to memory. We have carried out these, like, they are symbolic hugs to different spaces, places of memory in the city. We do symbolic embraces in different locations in the different cities, that places of memory. And we have also done this in the Public Defense Office. We have hugged, embraced these spaces because we feel that they these different spaces are linked to the right to life, the right to labor inclusion, and we want to work with all of these spaces for these ideas. And they also have to do with alternative and solidary economies that are the ones that we need and we demand. This is why we talked about the Festival for Memory, Land, and Good Living in Colombia. that is articulates the work of two universities, border universities, alternative, such as the University of the Earth, University of Good Living, that has me here present at this moment, and this is why we are speaking together. We are coordinating also a PhD degree, and this is a live classroom that I am at right now. I cannot show you a lot because my comrades have not arrived yet. It is raining now in Colombia, particularly in Bogota. So what is our idea with this PhD program? We want to remove ourselves from the academic, traditional academia, where everything is designed for us to work in a certain way. This is a PhD program that removes itself from that academic context, more a traditional one, because it is a community territorial initiative from social organizations. It is an initiative that has to do with territorial processes and how we can recover territory, how we can gain it back, draw it back. How is this done? It is done through action, through facts, symbolic acts, acts that join us, respectful acts that join us together. We are joined also in thought, and we are also joined in the different initiatives that we have, for example, talking about alternative economies and talking about knowledge, community knowledge. The development plans and public policies in my country particularly, and in the region of Latin America at large, are designed through the knowledge that social organizations have and through the knowledge that there is in the territory. That is where public policies start, because these are recommendations that we do as a community, that we give to governors so that they can design and include within their development plans the initiatives and the ideas and the knowledge of our communities, so that they can be sustainable, alternative, and so that they can reach communities. So when we talk about a PhD program in this context, in the context of alternative economy, in the context of transformative economy, and self-sustainable economy. Sustainability is generated by the community. Transformation is generated by communities. And even more so when we do not have labor inclusion in Colombia, where we all live in the informal economic market, and this informal economic market is the area that generates more jobs, more inclusion. In informality, most families work through informality. Processes, long-term processes are generated. These are long-lasting processes, long-lasting economic and sustainable processes that actually generate real transformation. And this is the initiative that we are trying to further through this PhD program that we are proposing in Colombia with our comrades from Argentina, from Brazil, from Europe, and also comrades from China, which we would like to welcome you, also from Japan, from the whole Asian continent. We want to invite you to participate with us and to help us transform this initiative that we have that has to do with self-sustainability based on the knowledge of communities. I would leave it here right now. Maybe I can leave it if there are any questions in relation to what I have mentioned. Thank you, Virgelina. And thank you very much for this embrace, this hug that you have given us. This hug is not only carried out through weaving and through sewing and through threads, it also has to do with ancestral knowledge. That idea of good living, we construct it, we build it slowly, but with a lot of solidity, it is very solid. And the comrades of our University of Sustainability can tell us if you want to ask questions now, or maybe we leave the questions for later in the panel. Because if there are not questions, I have something else I would like to add. Yes, please, go ahead, Virgelina, add that. The other thing that I wanted to say that we are mentioning in relation to the transformation of self-sustainable economies, we are saying that communities should design the modules of the PhD program. This module does not have to do with writing a document. It has to do with doing work, doing some kind of process, carrying out a process that strengthens community, that comes from the territories. How can we, from the knowledge that we have in our forms of self-sustainable economy, how can we generate these open classrooms? And these open classrooms that are generated, for example, from Colombia, myself, Virgelina Chara, in this open and live classroom, the aim is to have 150 ventures from our comrades, from the different comrades that are going to be part of this live classroom. And these people, they will participate in the module that we will design as an example to take when we start the PhD program, because we are working in territories, we are drawing information from territories, we are standing in our territories, and now during the next year we are going to start the PhD program with more information and with all of these questions that people have. Because of course new things always generate questions, and this of course is very valid, because if there are no questions, then things are not working clearly. So the more questions, the better. More people arrive, more people want to learn about what we are developing here. Thank you very much, dear sister. We will continue along this path with the University of Sustainability. We will also continue this path that many alternative universities are working on, which is the path of social and solidary economy through good living. And now we are going to move on to talk to our brother Jose Manuyama, who was born in Requena, in a town, a village in the Peruvian Amazon. He is a teacher of indigenous origin from the Cucama ethnic group. He is a member of the Committee for the Defense of Water, an intercultural collective that defends the non-commercialization of water and other common goods. And he also fights for human and non-human dignity that is threatened by the international predatory economy. So Jose, it is a pleasure for all of us, for this collective at large, to know you and to listen to you. We embrace you, Jose. The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine, Claudia. I am now going to start on this topic completely. There are no superiorities, nor inferiorities, no castes, no social classes. This is part of the rural and indigenous ancient dynamics of our Amazon indigenous peoples. that are in the east of Peru, while other peoples, other groups, for example, in Europe or even in America itself, in our Andean America, where there were chiefs, emperors, the Inca, for example, emperor, or in the Mexican groups, or feudalism in other parts of the world, or kings. There were social hierarchies, superficial ones that were imposed throughout history. In contrast, Amazon peoples have historically been egalitarian. There are no social hierarchies. Democracy, supposedly created by the Greek, a democracy that is exclusive because they had slaves. Our peoples, until to this day, rural peoples, the ones that have been less invaded by dominant culture, they still maintain, maybe of course not with the same rigor, but there is an equality where nobody is better or superior or inferior to another. So the Amazon people, we do not need to learn how to be equals. We have already the vein of human equality in our practices, in our daily practices. This is why it is very important to highlight in this event about alternative visions that we need to develop. There are elements in our groups, in our peoples, that are already being practiced and that are underestimated and that are set aside by dominant culture. We have a radical equality, a true democracy that really deserves to be strengthened, expanded to society at large. The Apu, that is the medicine man in our peoples, had no superior authority over others. He is not superior. He only has spiritual leadership, spiritual leadership, but he is not superior nor inferior. And this way of living that is so free is a choice, is an election of the peoples, of the groups. Knowing that other groups can live in other ways, our peoples have maintained to this day this way of living that is egalitarian, as it corresponds between people, as it should be. I can be a testimony. I am from this way of living. That is where I come from. So I am a witness of a form of living, a way of living that has made us happy for thousands of years, a way of living that does not exist currently, where we have superfluous hierarchies, silly hierarchies that only generate exploitation of man by man. So if we want to observe, if we want to walk forward towards a more human way of life, free of these superficial hierarchies, our peoples are going to be our references for this. On the other hand, there are things that we need to take into account that exist. That we do not need to discover. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We only need to change our focus to understand that there is no separation between man and nature. This is the way things are and should be. We are not superior to nature. We are nothing. We are not superior to life, to anything living on the planet. But this dominant understanding has made us to, it hasn't been necessary to have extraterrestrial devastators of the earth, because it has been Western understanding materialized and commercialized, has treated nature and life as something that is external, that must be exploited. It is social cannibalism and cultural cannibalism that is putting the planet on the brink of the precipice. But again, our peoples are the mirror to teach us that between nature and man, there is no separation. There is a complementarity there, a supplementarity that is necessary and that is fundamental, essential, that must be understood and cannot be denied. From our peoples, in our peoples, there was no separation between nature, mankind, and spirit. Native Amazonian peoples do not make any difference between spiritual nature and mankind. There is a coexistence, an active, intimate, ongoing, and permanent coexistence between these elements. Spirits live with us, nature lives with us, soul, energy is present, as the quantum physics say. And this proves that and the quantum physics shows and proves that this is not marginal thought or useless or fantasy, senseless thought. Totally to the contrary, energy is not created or destroyed, it is maintained over time. And we have lived with our energies, with our trees that have mothers, with our rivers that have mothers, in a way that we should be in permanent equilibrium, permanent balance between nature, the human body, and spirits that give us the essence to live. There is a biopsychocentrism in our people that is unknown, but it exists and we practice it, and it continues to resist. In the Amazon, we do not need temples because the temple itself is life, rivers. You just need to see our nature, the vastness of our forests, the large Amazonian rivers. We have the privilege of having these huge rivers. You only need to be there a few seconds on this river quietly, and you will feel the beauty of the surroundings and how we are only one. So we do not even need to meditate with our closed eyes. There was a spiritual coexistence, intrinsic, contemplative with our surroundings. And this is still maintained in spite of the cultural domination being devastating and absolute. But this is still a part of our peoples, of our groups, of our riverside groups and indigenous groups.
So this predator relationship is intrinsic to the economic Western prevailing thinking. The big companies that are destroying such as the illegal logging or oil companies, illegal mining, all these practices are negative, are horrendous, and they come from cannibal vision more than a humanist vision of man. But it's absurd because nothing can exist without its environment. We are not necessary as humans for the planet. The planet will continue existing without us. But there's a completely erroneous vision, a destructive vision that is prevailing, and we have to rethink that in light of the Buen Vivir principles. Indigenous peoples, us, it's not only us, it's all around the world. We managed to get vital knowledge that is, which has a purpose of expanding, of fertilizing life. Something that was a million years long. It's not a product of divine will. It's product of the intelligence of Amazon men and women, intelligence that managed to discover the biggest secrets of our nature without having universities as we think of them right now. The Amazon man had to build knowledge, very high level knowledge that it continues to exist in our reality. Today, universities are not universities, are centers of knowledge without any vision, that do not contribute to the comprehensive understanding of things or of life, and that contribute to the pillaging of life, as we have mentioned before. But then once again, these peoples which lead the way and show us that nothing is meaningful if we do not share life. Life is perfect. Human beings have everything to live. The planet has everything to exist. You don't have to fill it with devices. Nothing that is essential is lacking. Probably you need important things to improve our limitations, but you don't need anything to be able to live. Nothing of what is filling supermarkets at the moment. There's a neurotic feeling that you are always lacking something, an impoverished vision of human beings, in a way that humans have to be filled up with multiple things in a process that it's only collapsing the psychology of individuals and collapsing the world. A profoundly sick society, as many authors point out, such as Byung-Chul Han. We have this in Europe, we have this in our countries and in our peoples. Being aware that we are being forced to do not respect the profound teachings of our peoples. The living languages are part of the knowledge of our peoples. It's true that humanity has had to go through different paths to get to know itself, but the written language has been praised and it has allowed for many things, but the verbal, the oral knowledge seen in the multiple languages that we have in the Peruvian Amazon region, from which I am from, is extraordinary. To have languages that do not have any cryptographies or without written characters is a strictly living knowledge. Is something that requires a lot of cerebral capacity, and we were filled with that capacity. It's not that the peoples did not deserve to be taken into account because they did not have a written language. That is a language racism. But despite that, many languages disappearing, we have our languages. Even my own language, Kukama, which I don't speak, is alive. It resisted the years of discrimination. So that's the third element that I'm bringing here, so that we take into account. We have to recover that together. Now, Amazon food does not create or cause cancer. With our humbleness and knowledge, we were living fully in our own universe. Amazon man had to go hundreds of kilometers in boats or walking. We had to be very in shape to walk for hours in the forest, and you cannot do that if you are sick, if you are undernourished. Indigenous peoples before the arrival of the Europeans were living completely in good health and strong, and we were able to solve our problems with lots of intelligence, and we discovered the secrets of the forests so that we could live as the Hukawas peoples did, who had to fish the Baiche, the largest river fish, using their intelligence and with instruments taken from the forest without the need of metals, for example, as it was common for other peoples. In our peoples, we didn't need any large amounts of stones or metals to solve our human problems. So we had a strong health to live. Today, our life is filled with cancer, with diabetes, with all these problems. But fundamentally, we are filled with neurosis, with hysteria, with craziness that is preventing us from living in a harmonized way. Us, we had natural food, which was not sophisticated or pre-made as the food that is made today. We used to eat fish or cassava or plants, and that was enough. And it's absurd that cities have to live on processed food. It's crazy. This is why people are sick all over. How do we live? How did we live? My region didn't need to import anything. And didn't need to import food because we had everything very near. So it's important not only to us, but it's important for everyone because we are on the edge of the abyss. We are about to lose what we had. It's probably the man's cycle, the man who has dominated history for so long. Out of the big, large civilizations, there is nothing left, only ruins. And all civilizations have had high technology. But out of that past technology, we only have the ruins. However, living knowledge, languages, cultures are here present despite all the cultural pressure that we have had to bear. So we cannot continue using the Western logics because there is no good development and bad development. In order for there to be development, there always have to be a sideline destruction. I'm sorry, the connection is breaking up. So it's not about competition, and it's about exiting this murderous logics to create alternatives. So it's time for global decolonization. It's not only about an indigenous issue or from peoples around the world. Either we all become globalized, or we all become decolonial, so that we can get to a new horizon in a decentralized way, because we are not a single people. There are many peoples who have lots of knowledge and life, who deserve to have vitality, to find a way out and find an alternative. Either there's a transition or barbarism, or either we recover our ancestral knowledge or there's barbarism. So it's not about bringing people, getting people out of poverty, as many countries have done, and many others haven't even done that. It's about taking people out of ignorance. It's about spirituality, or indigenous spirituality. It's about healthy living. It's not about anthropocentrism that has prevailed the last few centuries. It's about biocentrality. It's about putting our harmonized living at the center, at the core, because apparently there's a tragedy ahead otherwise. So I thank you very much for the invitation for us to gather people all around the world to discuss these things. This forum is another brick to build that new humanity that we need. And here in our region, we are contributing to that purpose. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jose. We are very moved and touched by what you said, because with your intervention, you started with the issue about superiority, which has to do with this conception that there is no separation between nature and people. And so when you warn us of the extractivist practices, it's not only about extracting natural resources, for example, water, land, forests, and mountains. It's about the epistemological extractivism, extracting knowledge and the science that lie in territories and communities. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge on indigenous peoples and on the Amazon territory and its beauty, and also about health and food. That union, or that link between what we eat and how we eat it, and which has to do with consumption practices. So this last idea that you shared of going back to simplicity, of going back to local life, has to do with, or is part of this forum that is organized by the University of Sustainable Development. So thank you very much. And once again, we thank the organizers for this space, and we thank Claudia Caballero, who built the bridges for us to meet, for us to create complementary spaces and not competition. So thank you very much, Jose. And now we will go to continue discussing in this forum on good living. We talked first with our comrade from Colombia, Virgelina Chara. We continued with Jose Manuyama, who's in Peru, and now we will continue with Shaji Thomas, who was born in India but who is living in Brazil. Shaji is has a diploma, a Bachelor of Arts, also in law, and from 2014 he's part of the research team of the University do Pará, Brazil. He's conducting a research with on subjects related to the effects of climate change in Latin America, developing policies and actions oriented to urban and rural resilience and sustainable development. So it's a pleasure for me to meet you, Shaji, and also it's a pleasure for all of us, for all this community that is embracing you here. So thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm very happy for the invitation to participate in this forum. As Claudia said, I am from India, but 33 years I live in Amazon, work with the traditional communities. I am as an advocate, consultant for questions concerning rights of indigenous communities and African Brazilian communities. Also, I work about land issues of these people. Today, I would like to speak something about my work with these communities, how indigenous people are living in Brazil, what all are the challenges they confront today, especially with the climate change. So I am going to pass some slides. In Brazil, we have almost 1.5 millions of indigenous people. In all South America, we have got almost 18 million indigenous people living. And in Peru, Jose already said, we have almost 6 million indigenous people. And Bolivia, 4 million. And in Brazil, we have 1.5 million or 1.6 million people, indigenous people are living. It is very interesting that in 2010, we had 900,000 indigenous people according to the government census. And 2022, we have almost 1.6 million. And it seems like there was an increase of indigenous communities, indigenous people in Brazil, but actually it is not the fact. The fact that people started to recognize themselves more their origin. Before it was very difficult to say, identify yourself as indigenous people in Brazil because you are discriminated, you are considered people without any knowledge. Today, we have another sense. Being indigenous, we are respected by our own community. Still, we have got almost 40 isolated communities in Brazil. One thing is very important in Brazilian situation. We have a great migration to urban areas. Most of the indigenous communities, now it is close to the urban areas, and there is flux to the urban areas are very high. The diversity of indigenous communities is very, very big. Hundreds of living around 700 indigenous land we have got in Brazil. Almost 117 million hectares of land occupied. That is almost 14% of total territory of Brazilian land is occupied by the indigenous community. And all these, around 98% of all this land is in Amazon area, Amazon region. But this region is very sensitive areas because the whole Amazon region is highly biodiversity area and a lot of natural resources. So what is happening, there is many other stakeholders, they are trying to get inside these areas, and we have got a lot of conflicts in this area. Currently, the government identified 266 ethnic groups in Brazil, speaking 150 different languages. But we don't have any special university for the indigenous people in Brazil. The main economy of these people are extractivism. They collect hunting, fishing, gathering fruits, and also they use subsistence agriculture for living. You can see here the indigenous community is spread all over Brazil. Though there is a high concentration in the Amazon region of Brazil, they are seen in the south, north, east, all of Brazil. We can see small indigenous communities. It's more clear here. You can see indigenous communities, big communities, and small communities in the south, and their land areas. Here, more concentration in the northern part of Brazil. What are the conflicts and challenges these communities are facing today? According to the Institute of Institute of Spatial Information of Brazil, only in 2019, almost 500 kilometers square of indigenous land was deforested. But it is not deforested by indigenous people. Those people from outside the indigenous community who entered into the land and deforested. And the last 4 years, the previous government, we had lot of problem with the government. The government is supposed to protect these communities. They really destroyed most of the communities. There was no help from the community. It was a very sad 4 years for all indigenous communities in Brazil. There was a lot of land invasion, illegal exploitation of natural resources in the last 4 years, even supported by the government. That was very sad for us. The indigenous land is illegally occupied by mafia of loggers, agro-business. We have got a big plantation of soybean, rice, and maize in all the indigenous areas today. We have got a big cattle grazing. Thousands, millions of cattle are grazing in indigenous areas. We have got mining, legal mining supported by government. We have got illegal gold mining in almost all the indigenous communities. The mining is a big problem for us. What is happening is that they use mercury, and most of the community is contaminated with mercury poison. Even the fish, the main food there, is contaminated. So that the increase of health problem of indigenous communities is very high. Then other conflict we are facing here in Amazon, it is not only the case of Brazilian Amazon, it is a case of Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, the constructions of dams, infrastructure by the government, highways, railways, without the consent of the indigenous community. Though there is international accord, agreements that the indigenous community, traditional community should be consulted for any exploitation of their land. Most of these projects are not being consulted. Even the consultation of these communities are very superficial. One great example is Belo Monte construction. It's a huge dam in Brazil. It displaces more than 30 communities, traditional indigenous communities from the forest. That is one of the reasons that we have got a lot of indigenous communities in urban areas. They don't occupy the center of the city. They go to the periphery of city. They suffer. They don't have the food, natural food they used to have in the forest. They have to buy the food. They have to eat the contaminated, industrialized food. They have no more right to exercise their culture. I was last month in Acre with some indigenous communities who are living in the city of Acre. What has happened there? I met with some of the young people studying in the university, young indigenous people. What they told me was very sad thing. They wanted to have a place to have exercise their religious functions, but they could not. They have no money to buy. They have no support from the government. So they have to do in the public areas, and many times are hostilized by the people of the city. And this is happening all over Brazil. Example, the Mundurukus people are being expelled from their own land by the loggers, drug mafia, and many indigenous leaders are being killed. I will be telling later the violence against indigenous people. In the one of the big indigenous land, we have the Yanomami in Roraima and in Amazon state of Brazil. Around we have got around 20,000 indigenous people living there. That same land we have got more than 20,000 outsiders living there, exploiting their indigenous people's land, resources, and it always in conflict with indigenous people. There are a lot of death. Last week, one 4-year-old indigenous child was shot dead by this group. It is very recurrent happening in all over indigenous land. The urban migration of indigenous people is very bad situation because the biggest city of in Amazon, Brazilian Amazon is Manaus. 10 years, we had increase of 300,000 people in Manaus city. And many of these people who come from the forest, they stay in the city. And they have very little, you can see the picture, how the situation of indigenous people living in Manaus city. They have to choose periphery of the city with very little condition to live, to have little right to live. No houses, no sanitation facilities, not even a good water to drink. You can see the Manaus city, periphery of Manaus city. It's a Manaus city, a photo from the Manaus city, you see. The occupation and the forest. One of the indigenous leaders said, we occupied with our indigenous brothers of various ethnicities who came from various places where they lived. They can't, there is no public policies to help the indigenous people to stay in their own land. Who said, told very clearly, they cannot have the food they used to have. The water is contaminated, lot of sickness brought by the people outsiders who go there to exploit the natural resources. No government facilities, and they are obliged to go out of the city, out of the forest to the city. Today, Manaus, they have got, besides indigenous communities, Haitians and Venezuelan communities got there. So all the time, these people have to live in the periphery of the city with the minimum condition of living. And 2021 was a very dramatic time for the indigenous people. It is a dramatic time for all 500 years of occupation, but the last 4 years, violence against indigenous people in Brazil had grown up with the support of the government. Lot of invasion of indigenous land, attack against indigenous villages. Where I live in the Santo, a city with 300,000 people, there are more than 100 communities of indigenous people. Last month, the schools were burned down. Indigenous schools were burned down in the villages. And there is no much investigation. Nobody says anything about. And they have no teachers to teach their children. Many times they want to put some indigenous people to teach them, but the local government will not support them. They want to send local government sent teachers from the city to the village to teach indigenous people, and they have to learn in Portuguese, not in their own land. So we have a lot of problems. So most of the people, they have no more conditions to stay in the forest. And people, they make a march. And this year, they had gone to the city, capital city, Brasilia, stayed there for a week to show, draw attention of environmental racism and violation caused by climate change against indigenous people. And they put 18 demands. They declared climate emergency in the country for the indigenous people. And the first demand was demarcation of indigenous land. The cause of all the problem is that demarcation of indigenous land. The Constitution of Brazil, they have guarantee of demarcation of indigenous land for the indigenous people within 30 years. But it is not done. Indigenous people have and the new thanks, but within 6 months, the ministry lost its power to demark indigenous land. Why? The political issues are always against indigenous people. The pressure from the agribusiness mafia influences the government. So the government has a good will to do something, but many times they are slaves of big agribusiness in Brazil. Indigenous people wanted to have indigenous people in National Institute of Indigenous People, FUNAI, that is an institution created by the government to protect indigenous people. The last 4 years, we had military people taking care of indigenous people. And it was very sad situation. Instead of protecting, FUNAI systematically tried to destroy indigenous organizations, indigenous communities. Indigenous people also asked for special secretariat for indigenous health because hundreds of indigenous people died of sickness in the last 4 years. Also, they want voice in the discussion of climate change. The indigenous people are vulnerable, and with the climate problems, the vulnerability of these people have grown very high. And most of the discussion of climate change, they are excluded. Their knowledge is not respected. They have to obey the decision made by the federal government. They have no voice. Their voice are not heard. Last year, the health situation of Anomami of all huge area of Roraima and Amazonia, it was very bad. Thousands of indigenous children died. During the corona pandemic of COVID-19, more than 50,000 people, indigenous people, were contaminated in 163 ethnic groups. Only in 2021, more than 1,000 indigenous people were killed by COVID. That is a big loss for the people, for the indigenous leaders who were killed. Who took the sickness to them? The smugglers, outsiders who go for exploiting the natural resources of these communities. In 2021, just I am showing some of data, recent data. 2000, they have land issues. There are 144 land to be identified. 44 land for indigenous people are identified. 73 are declared indigenous land, but only 8 were ratified by the government. And out of 8, these 5 are still problem with the law. More than 598 pending action of demarcation of indigenous land. The basic right for them is a demarcation and protection of their territory, their land. Their land is for them, is their life. Hussein told us very clearly, we cannot separate nothing from the indigenous people. Their nature, water, land, forest, and their life all integrated. So we cannot separate. Any problem with the water, any problem with the forest, any problem with the land, a problem with their own life, they are all integrated. So the basic right to have their own place, to have their own food, their own place to worship, the sacred forest, for them, that is life. If you take this, invade forest, deforestation, exploration, they are taking away their own life. It is very sad to think that indigenous, for many times I had been working with them, and many, even indigenous people, they never say that I am indigenous people because they are ashamed to say, because they were considered, if you say I am indigenous person, the people treat me very bad. Now it has been changing. That is great thing. So that more people are declaring themselves indigenous. In Brazil, the census, they ask the question, we can self-declare we are indigenous or African origin or white or black. You are self-declared, and more people are conscious that their origin. That is the reason, the recent census of 2022, we have almost double number of indigenous people in Brazil. In 2021, we have 145 abuse of power of indigenous people, multiple threats. We had almost 197 sexual violence against indigenous people. We had almost 167 persons who were killed, indigenous people were killed in just 1 year. So all this was showing that to be an indigenous is a difficult time for them. No land. Their resources are exploited by outsiders. That is one of the reasons they are coming out of the forest, their own land. I want just to put the speak of Kleber Caripuna. Is a coordinator of Association of Indigenous People of Brazil. For him, there is no longer any doubt that indigenous territories contribute to the combating climate crisis. Demarcation is a solution for climate justice and the maintenance of democracy. It is very strong speak. We cannot exclude indigenous people to protect our planet. We cannot have a democracy without the participation of indigenous people. Without the inclusion of the knowledge of these people, we cannot discuss about climate change issues. Another sad thing in Brazil is the temporal framework that is being discussed in Brazil now. What is this? Marco temporal. It's a legal thesis according to which indigenous people have the right to occupy only the land they occupied or already disputed on October 5th in 1988, date of promulgation of the Constitution. That is a mechanism created by the landlords and agribusiness mafia to exclude indigenous people to have their right to land, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. And this discussion is in Supreme Court. And at the same time, the Congress passed a bill accepting temporal framework for demarcation of land. That means from the 1988, the land are being occupied by the indigenous people. They cannot be demarcated. It can be used for other purposes. That is a big setback for all the struggle of indigenous in Brazil. It was systematic destruction of life of indigenous people. I'm telling about, I was doing some research work on Amazon region about the climate change. And we used modeling 1961 to 1990, and the tendency of RCPC 4.5 and 8.5, the temperature, the rainfall in the Amazon region. We have a great fall in the rainfall in 50 years in Amazon. The same thing happens with the temperature. We have great height in the temperature. Air temperature, we can go very high in the whole region of Amazon. And the same thing with the rise of sea level. And all these effects of climate change, how they affect the community. Salinization of soils and water of Amazon region. It means, again, the lack of food for the indigenous traditional community who live in Amazon. Elevation of temperature. Last month I was visiting some indigenous community. I asked them, what do you think about climate change? They laughed at me, what they couldn't understand. No, we don't feel anything about the climate change. Then I asked, what about the rains? Yes, we have little rain, and rain is out of order. The time we used to plant, we used to make fire, small areas, we cut down and make fire to plant our cassava. But today we cannot do it because we cannot accept any time it rains, and we cannot do our plantation this year. That means they have no food for a plantation. They depend on it. And also the high temperature. They told me that one thing interesting. Earlier, we used to go to the area of plantation 7 o'clock in the morning, and we used to come back 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Today, we cannot do. 9 o'clock is too hot. It seems like the sun just came closer to the earth. It is the words of these people. And we cannot go out after 9 o'clock. It is very, very hot. All these affect the life of these people. The scarcity of water. The small rivers are become dry. The fish they eat are contaminated with the mercury. The natural resources are being exploited by outsiders. Even their own land, they cannot even enter. That is the situation. So what all of the perception of climate change by these people? They have got a holistic point of view. They cannot separate climate change with their life, their daily life. Use said very clearly, they are all integrated. Their life is integrated. The indigenous people don't talk much about more or less commitment of government regarding emission goals. They don't talk about it. That is not an interest for them. They don't offer their opinion 2 or 3, 4 degree rise in the average temperature across the planet. They don't talk about the carbon credit, clean development mechanism, nor they use any of the climate jargon common of the international negotiation table that appears news without expressing anything concrete. They have not interest in a big talk, big discussion. For them, what is important? Their life is rapidly changing due to influence of non-indigenous people. How the animals, plants, and rivers have responded to all this pressure of outsiders. What kind of solution would amount to these people? Not just a big discussion on the paper, on discussion table. What is important? How they can live peacefully in their own land. That is important for them. For them, indigenous territories are holding back the advance of climate change. It is no doubt. Though they occupy 14% of all territory in Brazil, they have a great influence in the climate change. It is interesting, in the 30 years, only 1% of native vegetation where indigenous live are disturbed, when we are 20% of loss in other area where there is no influence of indigenous people. And to finish my talk, is it time to listen to indigenous people? What the traditional community sees that it is development model chosen by most of the industrialized countries that need to change. The solution must be real, not palliative. There was climate change, we do something. Not, it doesn't solve our problem. We need lifelong solutions for our problem. Any solution of climate justice need to have the conversation with the communities. They have the right to participate in all process of the negotiation. They are not just there to obey what comes from the central government or national, international organization. They have to be heard first. The community of indigenous community has to be heard first. The traditional knowledge must be recognized. They have been living hundreds, thousands of years in harmony with nature. There was no problem of climate change. So they know the solution, and we have to respect. We have to hear them, and we have to bring this discussion to the international table. Engage in dialogue with indigenous people is vital. And see other side of the coin. We cannot see only one side of a European side or industrialized country side of the things. We have to see the other side, the indigenous perception of climate change, indigenous knowledge about climate change, indigenous solution for climate change. Any proposal does not include this element, nothing more than a mere diplomacy, just words. So what is happening in Brazil is also happening. Next month I will be going to visit Colombia, Bogota. We have discussed with some indigenous communities. And last year I was in the Peruvian Amazon areas. And all I see same problem in all the indigenous territories: conflict with the land, conflict with resources, and most of the time the indigenous people are not heard. So it is important to discuss climate change, to discuss any solution, to even discuss the democracy. We need to hear the wisdom, the knowledge of our brothers and sisters, our indigenous people. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Saji. Your contribution is extremely valuable. It has to do with the fact that when we speak about climate change, we are speaking about indigenous peoples, we're speaking about communities. Shaji Thomas warns us of the need of bringing that debate to the international arena. And 14% of the Brazilian Amazon is inhabited by indigenous communities. Shachi also described very interestingly the processes of deforestation that the Amazon is going through, and in consequence that the indigenous peoples are going through. So all socioeconomic processes to which communities face, and they are having their ancestral practices affected. In this sense, Shachi also warns about the closeness of indigenous communities to urban and centers causes an exercise of a commodifying life. So he warns us of conflicts, and among those conflicts we see the fact that communities are increasingly affected by money because the city is forcing them to engage in a monetary exchange with official currencies. Also, cultural processes are affecting communities. On the one hand, this is related to self-perceiving as indigenous, and also it has to do with the conception, because ever since 2021, there was a drastic moment for all indigenous communities in what has to do with the invasion and eviction from the lands, and also indigenous leaders who were affected, whose rights were violated. So in this sense, Shachi suggests to have an international debate and to bring the communities' voices, because climate change depends on these communities, because they are the way of cultural, economic, and political life to solve this. It's part of the challenge that we face, so that we can discuss all these issues. So thank you, Shachi. We will continue having a conversation with you. Now we will continue with this beautiful talk on this seminar on good living, with this proposal by the University of Sustainable Development. We have our colleague Laura Collins. She is an Argentinian living in Mexico. She has a BA and MA in social anthropology and a PhD in anthropology. He has been awarded or invited as a conferencist in different international seminars and meetings. She's a member of the Agroecology Network as a way of life called AFOBI. So, Laura, it's a pleasure for me to have you here among us, so that you can continue contributing with experiences and conceptual frameworks. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Claudia. It is a pleasure to be with friends and with people whom we share ideas with. I would like to start this talk as with a bit of background information. I am in the network of solidarity economy since its beginning in Mexico, but I have been working on these issues, on these topics for over 30 years now. And there is a coincidence between those of us who have been working on solidarity economy, where we think that we need to change the logic of reproduction of capital through the logic of life or reproduction logic. This is mentioned by Coraggio. I also mention it in several articles. It is mentioned by many authors, but it is not new because this has existed for a long time. We need to produce to satisfy the needs of the social group and not to make money. But this is not what I want to talk about today, not centrally at least, but I do want to focus on good living. What happens when good living comes up between 2007 and 2009, when we have the constitutions of Ecuador and Bolivia rolled out, and when we started to work on what later we will call the other or southern epistemologies. This is when we start to try to look at the logics of native peoples, indigenous peoples, indigenous. It doesn't matter the word that we use to define them or to call them, but what happens when we focus on trying to understand these other epistemologies or other ontologies? What happens? We realize that, yes, we need to change this logic of production of capital, and we need to change our focus, our view. But this entails also changing categories of thought or thinking. And this is a big change because reality is not objective. It is interpreted by us, by human beings. We don't know how animals interpret them, through categories of thought. And these categories of thought or thinking, far from positivist objectivism, they are not universal. These categories are conditioned by culture. And there is the great lesson learned that has to do with trying to see through categories of native peoples, trying to see through the categories in the eyes of native peoples, ethnic groups, or how we want to call them. So we have to learn to see the world through other categories. And this is not a simple task at all, because we have our own categories, Western categories, so incorporated to an extent that they are absolutely subconscious, and we need to make an effort of deconstruction in order to change them. Because my time is limited and we also want to hear from other colleagues, I am just going to focus on 3 categories that come from native peoples, from which we have learned many lessons, and that entail a very significant change in our way of seeing the world. The first one has to do with the concept of subject. West, and this is very recent, as Weber mentions it in his work, West creates the concept and the idea of an individual subject. And this idea of an individual subject is very important because that creates reflexivity. Psychoanalysis comes from that, many important things in terms of the construction of subjectivity. But it is not the only way of understanding ourselves. as individual subjects. What I have learned from communities is that in communities, there is just a minimal idea of the individual subject, and what is dominating is actually the idea of a collective subject or collective subjects in plural. Even more, in the struggles of the Mexican indigenous peoples, they have been struggling for years for the juridical legal recognition of collective subjects. But what is important in this understanding of collective subjects? The important thing is that you don't think of yourself in individual terms, nor reproduction is understood in individual terms, but as a group, as being a member of a group. And being a member of a group, one is a member of a family, one is a member of a community, and one is co-responsible for the reproduction of the rest of the group's members. And this is so clear that even those who love numbers and hard data can check this with a flux of income that comes back to countries by migrants. Migrants send back money, fluxes of money to their home countries and hometowns because they feel responsible for their domestic units. I know that feminists criticize the idea of unit because they don't say, but it doesn't matter. We'll leave that discussion aside for now. But there is a sense, an idea that everybody is co-responsible for social reproduction of the group. Everybody is responsible for their group, even for their families, because for their communities, because people who are migrating not only send back money for their family, but also for community work in many cases, for community festivities, for public works carried out by the community. And even more so, there are social integration mechanisms that refer to the obligation of collaborating with the community through different categories or different institutions, social institutions that mark the obligatory character or the compulsory character of being co-responsible for social reproduction of this collective subject called community. So that's where the concept of communality comes from, different from community, in order to speak of these obligations that you have as a member of this collective subject. In the case of the family, there is a very interesting case in the Andes. In Bolivia, you are not considered a person until you are married. And why when a person is married? Because once you are married, you are completed. The being on its own is not complete until there is a complementarity through marriage. From this understanding in the Bolivian Andes, that is when we move into this concept that I feel is so important, this other concept that I believe is very important in our shift of ways of seeing, which is the concept of complementarity. In the positivist Western Cartesian logic, beings that live the earth are not only individuals, but they are competing individuals. Competition for survival, competition of the fittest, all social Darwinism is based on this, and economic competition for the supposed scarce goods. But the notion that we find in native peoples is the notion of complementarity. The notion of complementarity refers to the fact that instead of competing, you complement or supplement with others. And this contributes to, or this is applied to personal relationships. A man or a woman is not complete until he is not or she is not in a family structure or married. This means that there are complementarity relationships with different functions. But this idea of complementarity also applies to nature. So both in the Andean world and in the Middle American or Mesoamerican world, the milpa in Mexico and chacra in the Andean world, this is a parcel of land, productive land, that is absolutely diverse and complementary. And it is very interesting how plants are put in association to each other. Corn is sowed along next to beans because they supplement each other in terms of their features and their nutrients and everything. But there are many other complementarities, domestic animals and also chicken and turkey. They circulate through the milpa because they contribute to the biological control of species, because they eat the insects or the different or worms, but at the same time they fertilize the earth. So there are relationships of complementarity and of interdependence where everything and everybody collaborates for social reproduction, not only of the domestic groups, but even reproduction of nature in association or associativity. And when one asks peasants why they do that, the answer is very interesting, because first they say is that they get along well. The bean gets along well with the corn, and the corn gets along well with squash. But in other communities, I've heard that they say something different. Not only that they get along well, they say they are family. Anthropologists, we have been saying for a long time that all cultures have taxes. There's a way of classifying things. In the West, families integrate based on are constructed based on similarity and in Western understanding of they construct families in the biological world. But in the complementarity idea, families are not integrated by similarity, but by complementarity or by so this idea of classifying reality according to complementarity and not likelihood or similarity, or likeness or sameness and similarity. There is a thinker who says that the three principles of logic that come from Aristotle are the principle of identity, the excluded third, and the principle of contradiction. A is identical to A, it's different from B, and C is different from A and B. And these principles are contradicted by the logic of native peoples, who, instead of having the principle of identity, have the principle of complementarity and the principle of interdependence between people, with nature, between people, and between the elements of nature themselves as well, in order to feed back. And the third idea that I wanted to share with you, the third notion that also comes from native peoples and that I find very interesting. And Evo Morales always refers to this idea and he repeats it. It's the idea of equilibrium or balance. What is equilibrium? It is equilibrium between the different spheres of life or realms of life. To me, it was very important to understand this idea of equilibrium or balance in the transformation of my own personal life. Why? Because the Western idea that has to do with the individual is applied in production, for example, with monoculture or specialization. Monoculture is a plant that grows alone because any other weed that is next to this plant will compete for the resources of the earth, this idea of competition. And so this plant that grows on its own, and with modern technology, it is not only one plant, but it is also a variety of plants. The super seed, that is the hyper-productive seed that has to replace all others, like what Monsanto is selling, instead of the diversity of varieties of a certain plant. And that plant, in addition, will also cover thousands of hectares through a super specialized monoculture. This idea of the specialization, full specialization in a single plant, is also applied to people. People people, our academic or scholarly formation leads to the formation of super specialists on a single topic, concentrated and focused on only one line. The specialist, I always say the specialist on the thumb of the left foot that doesn't know what happens to the right foot, or the heart specialist that has no idea what happens in the lungs, for example. This super or hyper specialization leads to the effort concentrating on a single activity. So human beings, and this is something that is increasing in as academia, we have to focus on our professional careers, we have to accumulate points, we have to compete with everybody else in order to be a hyper specialist. And this is leading to the abandoning of productive capacities. The person is so focused on his or her professional career that they don't have time to cook, they don't have time to tend to the garden, to care for pets, but they don't have time increasingly to maybe tend to a family or to form a family. This is happening. It is happening in Japan, where men do not want to marry because that will take away energy from competing with others in their professional lives. But we're also seeing it on this side of the world, particularly in women, where their professional careers say that they have to do their master's, then their doctorate, and then they have to insert professionally, and then they are not able to have children because their reproductive age is over. So all of this very long explanation is to make a comparison with the notion of equilibrium, how equilibrium has to do with a balance between work and social reproduction, but also the activities involving affection, rituals, symbolic activities, time for leisure, time for creativity. And this entails taking away the energy to the competitive part of work and spreading it out in a notion of equilibrium or balance. And I still have one last concept, one last notion, which is the notion of reciprocity. What is reciprocity? Historically, it comes from many different traditions that exist all over the world. And it has to do with the exchanges that we carry out, non-monetary exchanges, and the idea of gift. The gift is the obligation of giving, accepting, and returning and giving back. The reciprocity notion is even present in the modern world. When we make a gift, the person that accepts the gift feels obligated to return the gift later to the person who gifted him or her before. When we invite someone to dinner, then we invite the person then invites us. So it's an exchange between two symmetric beings that do not need, it doesn't have to be in the same moment. It can be deferred in time. That exists in our society, but it exists in a generalized way among native peoples. The magnitude in which it exists in native peoples is much larger. According to Polanyi, the three mechanisms of integration or circulation are reciprocity, which is this that I've just described, the market, where goods circulate, but there is an exchange of payment, and I paid and the transaction ends. But in contrast to reciprocity, which is an ongoing game of giving and returning and giving back. And redistribution is the third way, where the state returns the service and redistributes wealth collected by taxes. But what I am interested, particularly in reciprocity, is that it entails not only reciprocity among human beings through the gifts, but there is also this idea of reciprocity with nature. And this is a big shift in mentality that is useful to us to understand. I can't remember the name of our comrade. Oh, Shoshi, who talked about climate change, because we are not talking about the Anthropocene as a destroyer of nature. We talk about the Capitalocene now, or Capital Scene, because human beings have been here for all these years, but we have not been always as destructive with nature as we are now, where we are on the brink of collapse, because this notion of reciprocity with nature existed before. First of all, nature is a subject, is another subject, a collective subject, and relationships that human beings establish with nature are relationships of reciprocity. By subjectivating nature, we call it Mother Earth, we call it Pachamama. We ask her, I haven't discovered Andean rituals yet, but in all rituals in Mexico of hunting, gathering, agriculture, fishing, all of them, there is a ritual where we ask nature, I'm going to take from you, but I'm not going to take more than I need to survive. And there are offers. They are offers also of food, flowers, and dance and music, because there is a relationship between subjects, human subjects. We all already speak of more than human when we talk about nature, more than human, where there are relationships of giving and taking, giving, receiving, and giving back or returning. So learning is not easy. Learning to see with these new concepts, taking off our Western glasses. Of course, not all Western people are, or Western thought is bad, but Western Cartesian, positivist, objectivist, and wearing other glasses, putting on other glasses and learning to see, but also learning to behave according to these categories: collective subjects, complementarity, equilibrium, reciprocity. All this entails a shift, an economic shift, as we started speaking of solidarity economy, but it also entails a change or a shift in our ways of life. From here, when Claudia introduced me in relation to the network that I belong to, we called it agroecology as a way of life, just to say that it is not only a technological change or economic change, it is a civilizatory change in our way of seeing the world. And this, trying to understand these other ways of seeing the world, is what we call South epistemologies or other epistemologies, and it is the new change in which we are involved in these networks. Thank you very much. This that you have just mentioned, Laura, is so rich. It is so full, this idea of turning off our coloniality glasses to put on other glasses, to understand, also going through processes that are sometimes painful. So these categories that Laura proposes, that are not only theoretical categories, they are categories that have to do with practices, as Virgelina Chara mentioned before. And this subject of individuality with which we were all formed, we were all trained in this idea of the individual subject, and shifting to the collective subject, to the idea of collective subject that we learn from indigenous peoples day by day, and understanding interdependence. This is crucial, as our previous comrades also mentioned, as clearly Jose Manujana mentioned. I don't know if Jose, if you are still here in the Zoom, but there is a continuity between the thought that Laura, or the thinking that Laura mentioned, and the exposition that Jose, you had done before your presentation. And this enables us to continue this dialogue related to equilibrium or balance. Of course, this balance is not a perfect balance. It is not the balance that says that everything is always perfect and we always have the same results. It is an equilibrium that moves forward and then takes steps back. It is meandering, and there are contradictions in this equilibrium, and that is what makes it interesting. And also the idea of reciprocity, as was mentioned by Laura very clearly, this economic, collective, spiritual reciprocity, reciprocity that has to do with love and loving relationships and meeting, joining together, that makes a shift from the idea of reproduction of capital to reproduction of life, and the way this needs new canons, emotional, cognitive, and loving, in order to continue constructing. We have been in this seminar already for 2 hours, and we have mentioned a lot of diversity, epistemic diversity, emotional diversity. So on my side, I would like to now see if there have been any questions in the chat box, questions that have appeared. But it has been up to now very loving to be a part of this seminar. We have discussed very rich issues, and it has gone by very fast in spite of the time that we have been here. And that, I believe, has to do with the fact that diversity brings this time, colonial time, a strict colonial time is transformed into a different time, a time for words, for knowledge, for feelings. So just to close, I think that maybe each one of the people who have been here as panelists, maybe they could, or you could close with 1 or 2 sentences. Jose Manujama, Sahis, I don't know if you are still there. Virgelina, go ahead, please.
Hello, comrades. Thank you very much. I was here listening to the whole conversation. I think it's very satisfactory in terms of this exercise that we are trying to conduct. So I'll be here attentive to all proposals because we are constructing something. So all recommendations are welcome. All the suggestions that have been made by my colleagues are welcomed. Thank you very much to all of you for having invited me to this space. I'm leaving very happy, and of course we continue constructing this path. A big hug for all of you from Colombia. We are still growing in terms of knowledge and processes. Virgelina, there's a question addressed to you related to Margarita Boterno of the University of Land of Colombia. Yes, what about it? So they were asking about Margarita, whether you know her initiative and the processes that she has been doing at the University of Land in Colombia. Yes, I do know Margarita. I know the process she has been conducting in Cartagena, but we are here in Bogota, not in Cartagena. So we are trying to articulate the University of Good Living and the University of Land in Bogota. I do know the process she is conducting in Cartagena, but she is over there. And when there are any events with the University of Land in Bogota, she comes here because this is an articulated proposal. Or maybe we go from here, from Bogota to Cartagena when she is convening any event by the University of Land. Thank you, Virgelina. No, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here, and I'll see you later. I'll see you in another opportunity. I see Victor's hand raised. I don't know first if Shashi wanted to say something before Victor. Well, first of all, a big greeting to all of you who are here at this exchange of ideas and proposals. I am a member of a non-governmental organization, which is the Commission for the Defense of Human Rights here in Ecuador. And we have been for several years working with indigenous and peasants organizations, supporting them in their processes of strengthening and political formulation ever since the representative revolt in 1990. Indigenous peoples and indigenous nationalities here in Ecuador have undergone a process of organizational development, which has been very significant, and their initiatives of social rights became proposals for political participation by the initiative of the Confederation of Indigenous Communities of Ecuador in 1996, the movement of plurinational organizations was born, which gathers different nationalities and also Afro-Ecuadorians and social urban organizations. This process resulted in the Constitutional Assembly in 2007, where a series of suggestions were discussed, where for the first time at a worldwide level, the rights of nature were acknowledged, not the right to nature, to water, for example, but the rights of nature. And this is very important because that resulted in several articles that then were applied in different laws for economic and social promotion to recognize the collective rights of indigenous communities and peoples, and to recognize nature as subject of rights, and to preserve its and to safeguard it in case it was exploited or pillaged. So there was different legislative processes so that this is applied, and of course this has become a confrontation with the extractivist policies, because in the Constitution it's enshrined that all processes to extract natural resources have to be based on a previous free and informed consultation with the indigenous peoples where those resources are found. This has triggered a series of conflicts because the governments have not been consistent with the what the Constitution reads. They have favored multinational companies, and they have remained oblivious in the face of this illegal mining. Oil extraction has continued, but it's completely different to the case of mining, which is practically devastating and pillaging nature in its entirety. And also, the government has been indifferent to the exploitation of wood. The indigenous peoples, which are about 1.5 million people among the 18 million people of Ecuador, who are distributed all throughout the country in the tropical region, in the Andean region, and in the Amazon region. So this has triggered a series of processes of political configuration of the indigenous peoples' claims. So the governments, the different administrations have had to follow processes that were not of the like of, or that were not something positive for extractivist companies who wanted to extract resources. So I encourage you to read the Constitution of Ecuador, where there are different issues that have been a reason for recovery as a political process in different countries. Here we are living a process of citizen participation and social control in what has to do with public administration and political participation. The process of political formation that has developed in our indigenous communities has been very progressive in, despite the scarce financial resources. They have conducted workshops, for example, but these challenges were overcome. So the representativeness of the Wachakuti movement, which is based on indigenous people's participation, they managed to be the second political party ranked in the 2021 elections. We have 137 legislators, and 27 out of those were indigenous. And this happened during Rafael Correa's, and this was second to the number that was present during Rafael Correa's administration, which was 47. So what we suggest is that there must be a qualitative leap within the political organization of indigenous peoples, so that their intervention in public management at a local, provincial, and national levels is effective. And so in that way, this process has taken lots of efforts to promote education and participation in rural areas and in areas that have been abandoned by the state, so that they are taken into account in development plans. In some moment during the administration of President Rafael Correa, which was from 2007 until 2017 almost, there was a sort of co-management in some municipalities. So when budgets were approved at the municipality level, there was an official participation of social organizations. And in those processes, indigenous organizations were very important, so that they managed to have their demands taken into account in terms of help to get credit to invest in crops, the protection of water, the construction of infrastructure to avoid floods. This is an ongoing process. And also, it would be important to underscore that ever since this constitution, the protection of the environment, which is an obligation, and in terms of the investment in oil contracts, the environment is prioritized so that the jungle and the forest and the biodiversity is not destroyed. Now we are undergoing an important national process because we are developing a national level consultation which goes in parallel with the presidential elections on August the 20th. There's a consultation to see if oil that is in Yasuni is kept underground. So it's extremely important to say that what you have mentioned here is key, because we have to control the use of nature at the both at the superficial level and below the ground. We have an enormous wealth of resources in the Amazon, and it has to be conserved, preserved. So this, which was a demand by social organizations, so that this oil exploitation would be put to an end, now has become a national level consultation. And to conclude, I would like to point out that within the promotion of collective rights, of the rights of nature, what's most important is the participation in public administration, not only as claimed by social organizations that are demanding some things to the mayors or the local authorities, but actually they are there participating with their own community members. We in Ecuador have managed to have one woman elected in 3 provinces. In Tungurahua, this woman was elected, so there's political participation by indigenous communities and indigenous nationalities to influence, to shape public administration. So as it was mentioned before, complementarity lies in the alternative of political participation in public management through democratic election processes. That is my comment. It's an invitation to seek alternatives, not only in terms of planning. We had the National Plan of Good Living from 2013 to 2017. So we have to recover that term. We have to use good living and Pachamama as words. So this expansion of the right to life that has been discussed here and the respect of the environment has to be a protagonist with the political participation in election to strengthen a more direct and participatory and intercultural democracy, a democracy that takes into account all diversities in terms of social and economic diversities without any competition, but with solidarity and equality. That was my comment, and a big hug to everyone, and let's continue and move forward. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Victor. And I would like to ask David Barkin. David, do you want to ask some questions or comment?
Thank you very much. I want to congratulate Victor Hugo on the very clear presentation that he made of the situation in Ecuador right now. I think that it's extraordinarily important. I would like to return to the, well, not return, continue with the discussion of Buen Vivir and indicate that here in Mexico, there are a number of different ways in which the population is expressing Buen Vivir within its own cosmovisions. The population in Oaxaca about 20 years ago formalized a formulation of Buen Vivir in Mexico that is similar to, well, it's a Mexican variety of the Sumac Causai of the Andean region, and is similar to what Victor Hugo just mentioned. And it's called comunalidad. And the important thing about comunalidad is that it reinforces the notion that several of our speakers today have talked about the integration of society and nature. That is the unity of society and nature, which are Eurocentric societies are really denying. And this is extraordinarily important because it involves a political discussion that is very, very important of what is the role of community in protecting its territory. The key concept here in Mexico, a word which has not been used enough in this seminar today, is autonomy. And the use of autonomy is extraordinarily, the use of the concept of autonomy is very, very important. The concept of comunalidad in Oaxaca is similar to another concept, which is Yeque Miles, which is in Puebla, a different state in Mexico, of the second largest indigenous community, union of communities in Mexico, and that is called the Union of Cooperatives of Tosepan, La Unión de Cooperativas Tosepan, which is a group which now is celebrating 46 years of existence, and has just published a book about a plan for 40 years of future, their life plans for the next 40 years. So it's quite an extraordinary undertaking of this group of people, a group of people which numbers about 250,000 people. So I would like to stress that what we're talking about here are very, very large groups of people. I was very surprised, for example, that Shahi Thomas, talking from Brazil, gave figures of the number of indigenous people on the basis of census data, because as I put in the chat, there are about 25 million indigenous people here in Mexico, a number which is far greater than any of the countries that Shahi mentioned. But I think that he's underestimating the number of indigenous people in other countries. And I would like to end my short comment just referring to a community in Michoacan called Cherán, which is a group of 30,000 people who 12 years ago rose up against organized crime here, and a group, but with the leadership of a group of only 30 women who confronted this group of organized crime and sparked a movement in the community which has led to the reassertion of control of their territory and the once again rescuing of an indigenous culture and their language. And the importance of women's leadership in this community cannot be stressed enough. I could go into further details about that, but I think that I have spoken enough right now. And I'll leave it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I see Claudia Cabero, right? You would like to say something, right? Yeah, please turn on your camera.
Hello, it is a pleasure to me to be present in this seminar today, and to see and hear all of these very dear people who always have very important things to say. I would just like to make a short comment about some impressions that I draw from the different voices that we have heard today. And without a doubt, we need this guide with the testimonies of Virgelina, with the testimonies of Jose, and with the, of course, with Laura and Sahi's comments as well, in a much more categorical way, with a lot of study and understanding of these ways of living that are urgent. We need to listen to these voices. If not, we will be in a situation of crisis and collapse, even more so. And we have the obligation as well of looking for a new way of understanding the world, of inhabiting and staying in the world, of being in the world. And without a doubt, good living, these words, and communality and good living, these words that guide us in this way of living in a different way. What I wanted to say has to do with David's comment. The difficulty, I want to underline, the difficulty for these other ways of life to actually take place and be carried out in territories. We are constantly in a situation of violence in territories themselves. David has just mentioned some experiences in Mexico that are absolutely valuable, that have been able to persist and to transform, and they are a testimony and a model for many places. But the reality, the truth is that each one of these experiences in different territories faces many, many very difficult conflicts. In the month of May, there was a caravan called the South Resists. It was a caravan that was summoned by Zapatistas, and it did like a call, and it went through the devastation in the south of the country. Many mega projects are doing a sort of extermination of the native peoples. And this is particularly harsh in the south of the country. And this is a very difficult reality that the peoples themselves have to live with, and they have to also defend themselves from. So how can we balance on the one side if all these other ways of life that are necessary are at the same time undergoing a struggle, of course, from autonomy or self-management, but there are also indigenous communities that are also looking to interfere in public policy, or not interfere, to have a say in public policy. So how do we achieve this balance between re-existing and creating and reinforcing these alternative ways of life, and at the same time defending, sometimes with their own lives? There are many environmental activists, indigenous activists that have been killed in Mexico, and that defending their territories. And I believe that this is also part of this understanding of good living that we are talking about. Thank you very much.
Okay, and maybe we let our speaker to give some final remarks. Sajiv Thomas.
Thank you once again. So the final consideration that we need to hear the voice of nature. We need to hear the ancestral people. When I said about the indigenous people in South America, I say 18 million. If you put together all indigenous people in Latin America and all other countries, it's millions and millions. But the political representation of these people are very few. In all Latin American countries, especially in South America, the representative of political sphere, they are very few people. So if you want to have a change, if we need to have a sustainability for our generation, we need to hear the voice of the nature first. We need to retain back we have to rethink about our way of life. We cannot continue the way we are living now because it is unsustainable. So we need to hear the voice of the nature. We need to hear the ancestrality of these people, the knowledge of the traditional people, and their way of life. It is important, their participation in all the process. Though we have some constitutional guarantees for the traditional community, but most of the time they are not implemented really in most of the countries. So we need political representation of indigenous people. We need their participation in all the process, especially in the climate matter issue, what I said, we need to hear their voice. Only then we can have a real change in our society, and we can maintain a sustainability for a long period. Thank you.
Laura Colin?
Yes, I would like to end this very interesting dialogue with a reflection about a dialogue of knowledge, of different types of knowledge, the importance of a dialogue of knowledge that has to truly be a dialogue. We need to try to understand each other, because remember that I was talking about the different categories, and sometimes we use a word and the other person understands a different word or a different thing because that person is seeing it through the lenses of their own categories. And so my experience in my work with indigenous peoples here in Mexico, we have had to reflect on the words that we are using so as to really understand each other and to think about the changes that are necessary. For example, the concept of rights that our comrade from Ecuador was talking about. This is a concept that doesn't exist in the languages of native peoples. And when you go to an assembly or a meeting, you see that the word rights, they say it in Spanish. They are speaking in their language, but they say the words rights in Spanish because in their context, in their language, the concept that exists is obligation more than rights. The concept of rights is Western, the concept of obligation is theirs, but they have incorporated the concept, the notion of rights, and it has been very useful, as the other comrades have mentioned. It has been very useful, and it is a very important element in the struggle and negotiation with the state. It has been useful for organizations. They have assimilated it and used it. In other cases, for example, also from the logics of native peoples, they have had to introduce certain changes. It is very interesting how Zapatistas introduced the issue of gender, and they have achieved substantial changes in relation to women to the extent that their enemies consider them mandilones. Mandilones is a Mexican term to say very pejoratively, to refer to men who are dominated by women. So this shift has created other people calling them that. But these changes, both in communities as in ourselves, the ones who are accompanying these processes and we incorporate into these struggles, our changes have to be a part of a dialogue, this dialogue that is done in epistemic equity with mutual respect. And I do agree with Claudia. I do agree that a change in mentality, a change in a way of life, maybe not to new things, maybe they are very old things. This entails a struggle, of course. It entails a struggle in all different fields, in the practical field, with the defense of nature, with the defense of territory, with the defense of participation, of recognition and acknowledgement, but also in the field of knowledge and different knowledges. I want to say that once that CONACYS invited me to talk about other epistemologies, there were scholars that accused me of being a witch, of promoting superstition and non-scientific knowledge. So I want to stress the importance of deepening dialogue in a respectful manner, but without avoiding or shying away from discussion and reflection about what we are doing, about what we are proposing. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
And I would like to invite our co-moderator, Claudia, to give some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Well, this meeting has been so rich. It has been so rich, and this shows the moment in which we are going through with good living. What Laura was just saying, this dialogue of knowledges is nurtured, is fed by a diversity of words and concepts, but also of diversity of understandings. So the rigor of theory stems not only from thought and thinking, it also stems from each of the experiences of in the practices, in the different practices in territories. So I believe that this path of good living that we are moving on, and this richness between the University for Sustainability, University of the Earth, the Trueque Mishuke Collective, the campaign for the global curriculum, all of this speaks of a transcendence where processes of native peoples they carry in themselves good living. In this sense, everything that we do, everything that we are able to go through should go hand in hand with these processes related to spirituality, to communality, these processes where the native practices of the land, of nature, thinking, thought, and action, where these meetings that combine disciplines and knowledge are nurtured. So where is knowledge and epistemology of good living? It is disseminated in many different places at the same time. Inasmuch as we are respectful of these different parts, as Virgelina was saying before, an alternative PhD degree in popular economy for her that comes from ancestral practices and practices of embracing for the defense of human rights. How is this understood? Well, precisely because economic rights are also human rights. We need to give ourselves spaces to talk about economy, this economy of good living that has to do with these 4 categories that were very clearly presented by Laura Collin, that also have to do with the practices, ancestral practices mentioned by our comrade from Peru, and that precisely are related to all these practices taking place at a transnational level. This activism is related to our ways of life and is related to our food and the knowledge related to this. So we need to turn this around like a glove, like we turn around a glove, and we turn around this glove in different ways with different shapes, and we are doing it from different spaces. So as Claudia Jadira says, at the local level and at the global level, what is local is very important, because without local practices, even if they are small, and when they are small, there are no global transformation. We need many local practices, and we need our actions and our thoughts to go. I'm sorry.
We need to have recycling, good life, good living. And we have to learn to listen, to hear,
we need
and
to learn to learn.
So that we learned in a certain way, we have to start dismantling that, to start changing our lens, because science is not only in academia. We have endogenous science, which is the science of the territories. So all my love to this bridge that we continue building. And thank you, Klaus Shadira, for your enormous generosity. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, comrades. Thank you very much for this moment, this shared moment. And thank you for these spaces for dialogue. Kim Chilao, thank you very much as well. This is a very strategic moment for our organizations, because these are social organizations, organizations that are not supported by private capital. These are organizations that construct good living with the strategic partnership with other networks and movements around the world, which are alternative. We seem almost invisible for the rest of humanity, but we do a lot when we speak about good living. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And tomorrow, we will continue have the webinar about the how to learn the experience from indigenous group. And the two speakers, Jorge Santiago and Jorge Ishizawa, they have close relation with the indigenous communities in Peru and also in with the Zapatista in Mexico. And the time will start from the Hong Kong time, 9 p.m. to midnight. And all the Zoom webinars will be recorded and uploaded to the Global U, and of course, University of Good Living will also upload today webinars, and welcome to upload all the others webinars. So any friends who missed this tonight or others have other engagement, they can also watch the those previous lectures and webinars. So thank you very much for your patience and for your time. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.